Yeah, let's do it.
We have it in a bunch of angles.
Yes.
Let's just do it.
Okay. All right. Yes.
Yes.
Shall we start again because of that?
No, don't worry about it.
Hey, don't worry about anything else except you.
13th of February, 1945. Odysseus in Polyphemus's cave. You will I eat last. Yesterday afternoon, Neumark had called me over. I had to help him deliver letters this morning. I was quite unsuspecting. In the evening, Steinitz was up here with me for a while. I told him, and he was annoyed and said, "It will be for digging trenches." So, today at 8, I was at Neumark's. Frau Jörg came out of his room weeping. Then he told me, evacuation of all those capable of work. It's called outside work duty. As you have been released from duty, you remain here. So the end is more likely for me than for those who are leaving. That is not the case. On the contrary, remaining here is a privilege. The circular to be delivered stated that one had to present oneself early Friday morning wearing working clothes and with hand luggage, which would have to be carried for a considerable distance, and with provisions for 2 to 3 days' travel. In this case, there will be no confiscation of property, furniture, etc. The whole thing is explicitly called outside work duty, but is without exception regarded as a death march. Most cruel separations are taking place. Frau Eisenmann ensures she stay here. Liesel Eisenmann, the 11-year-old who wears the star, has to leave with father and Herbert. No allowances are made for old age, nor 17 or 7. What they mean by capable of work is completely incomprehensible. I had to inform Frau Stüller first. She was far more shocked than at the death of her husband, and rushed out to alert friends on behalf of her son Bernhard in the hope that they could intervene. Then I went by tram. I was permitted to do so. To the railway station and Strehlen Quarter with a list of 9 names. Simon, not yet fully dressed, maintained his composure, whereas his normally sturdy wife nearly collapsed. Frau Gede in Sedanstrasse, very much aged, eyes staring, again and again opened her mouth so wide that handkerchief she was holding in front of it almost disappeared inside. A desperate look on her face, she protested wildly and vehemently. She would fight against this order to the very last. She couldn't have abandoned her 10-year-old grandson, a 70-year-old husband. Her son-in-law was a prisoner of war for the sake of the German cause. She would fight and so on. Frau Kreisler-Weidlich, of whose hysteria I had been afraid, was not at home. Relieved, I dropped the sheet into the letterbox. Also in Franklinstrasse, I had to call on a Frau Pirkauer. I met her with her Aryan deaf husband. Ordinary folk. They were the calmest of those on my list. A Frau Grosse in Ringstrasse was bad, despite her self-composure. A middle-aged woman, rather ladylike, she wanted to call her husband, stood helplessly by the telephone. I've forgotten everything. He works in a confectionery factory. My poor husband, he's ill. My poor husband. I myself have very bad heart trouble. I comforted her. Perhaps things would not be so bad. It could not last long. The Russians had reached Görlitz. The bridges here had been mined. She should not think about death, not talk about suicide. I had to urge her for quite a while before I got the necessary signature of receipt. Hardly had I shut the door than I heard her weeping loudly. Even more pitiful was Frau Bitterwolf in Struwesstrasse. Again, a very shabby house. I was vainly studying the list of names in the entrance hall when a snub-nosed young woman with a pretty well-looked-after little girl, perhaps 4 years old, appeared. Did a Frau Bitterwolf live here? She was Frau Bitterwolf. I had an unpleasant message to give her. She read the letter several times, said quite helplessly, "What is to become of the child?" Then signed silently with a pencil. Meanwhile, the child pressed up against me, held out her teddy bear, and radiantly cheerful declared, my teddy, look." The woman then went silently up the stairs, and immediately afterward I heard her weeping loudly. The weeping did not stop. 29 Werderstrasse. Women on the stairs said Frau Tena was not at home, but I should call on her friend right at the top. A sickly, almost delicate-looking young woman in a very wretched attic room. She spoke very anxiously, said her friend had always feared this would commit suicide. I urgently preached courage. She should keep her friend's spirits up. At 52 Strehlener Strasse, where we had often visited the Reichenbachs and the Seligsons, I had to deliver the letter to Frau Dr. Wieser. Instead of her, the door was opened by an imposing matron in trousers, a Frau Schwarzbaum. She told me, and I remembered the case. The previous year, her own husband, together with Imbach, had committed suicide to escape arrest by the Gestapo. Finally, at 7 Bürgerwiese, I searched in vain for a Frau Weiss. Instruction from Neumark. Frau Weiss lives with her mother, Frau Kessner. You must immediately go back there once again. 7 p.m. Frau Kessner lived in the cellar of the side wing in the back court. A dark young girl opened the door. She read the letter with complete resignation. Yes, it was all the same to her now, only she didn't want to sign anything before Mommy had read it. Could I not come back once again? I said that would be impossible for me. Finally,
I got the necessary signature of receipt. At Neumark's, the whole office was crowded with those to be deported. I shook hands with Paul Lang, with Rieger, with Levinsky. You're going too? No? At that, there was already a gulf between us. I went to Waldman, who remains here. He set forth the grimmest hypothesis with very great certainty. And we, who remain here, we have nothing more than a reprieve of perhaps a week. Then we'll be fetched out of our beds at 6 o'clock in the morning and we'll end up just like the others. I put in, but why are they leaving such a small remnant here? And now, when they have so little time, you'll see, I'll turn out to be right.
We sat down for coffee that evening at about 9:30.
George, can you just start that?
Sure.
Yeah, that part again.
We sat down for coffee at about 9:30 that evening, very weary and depressed, because during the day, after all, I'd been running around as bringer of bad tidings. Then a full-scale air raid warning sounded. If only they would smash everything up, Frau Stühler said bitterly. We very soon heard the ever deep and louder humming of approaching squadrons. Light went out, an explosion nearby. Pause, in which we caught our breath. We knelt, heads down between the chairs. In some groups there was whimpering and weeping. Approaching squadrons once again, deadly danger once again. Explosions once again. Suddenly the windows on the back wall opposite the entrance burst open. Someone shouted, "Incendiary bomb! We have to put it out!" There were further explosions, but nothing in the courtyard. And then it grew quieter, and then came the all clear. Outside it was bright as day. Fires were burning on Pirnischerplatz, on Marschallstraße, and somewhere on the other side of the Elbe, the ground was covered with broken glass. A terrible strong wind was blowing, natural or firestorm, probably both. In the stairwell of number 3, the window frames had been blown in and lay on the stairs. Broken glass in rooms upstairs. No light. The water did not work. We could see big fires on the other side of the Elbe. We placed a candle on the table, drank a little cold coffee, ate a little, groped our way over the broken glass, lay down in bed. It was after midnight. I thought, just sleep. We're alive. Tonight we'll have peace and quiet. Now just put your mind at rest. As she lay down, I heard Eva say, "But there's glass in my bed." I heard her stand up, brush away the glass, and then I was already asleep. After a while, it must have been after 1, Eva said, "Air raid warning." I didn't hear anything. "Oh, definitely, it wasn't loud. They're going around with hand sirens. There's no electricity." We stood up. Frau Stühler called at our door. "Air raid warning." Eva called, knocked on Frau Korn's door, and we hurried downstairs. Eva was 2 steps ahead of me. We came to the entrance hall of number 3. At that moment, a big explosion nearby. I knelt, pressing myself up against the corridor wall near the courtyard door. When I looked, Eva had disappeared. I thought she was in our Jew's cellar. It was quiet. I ran across the courtyard to our Jew's cellar. The door was wide open. A group of people were cowering, whimpering to the right of the door. I knelt close to the door, next to the window. I called out several times to Eva. No reply. Big explosions. Again. The back windows burst open. Again, it was bright as day. Again, water was pumped. Then, an explosion at the window close to me. Something hard and glowing hot struck the right side of my face. I put my hand up. It was covered in blood. I felt for my eye. It was still there. A group of Russian prisoners of war. Where had they come from? Pushed out at the door. I jumped over to them. I had the rucksack on my back. In my hand I held the gray bag. And my old hat had fallen off. I stumbled and fell. A Russian lifted me up. To the side, there was vaulting, God knows, of what already half-destroyed cellar. We crowded in together. It was hot. The Russians ran on in some other direction. I with them. Now we stood in an open passageway, heads down, crowded together. In front of me lay a large, unrecognizable open space. In the middle of it, an enormous crater. Bangs as light as day. Explosions. I had no thoughts. I was not even afraid. I was simply terribly exhausted inside. I think I was expecting the end. After a moment, I scrambled over a parapet or a step or a wall into the open air and threw myself into the crater. Lay flat on the ground for a while, then scrambled up the side of the crater over the edge into a telephone kiosk. Someone called out, "This way, Herr Klemperer!" In the demolished little lavatory building close by stood Eisenman Sr. with little Shorshi in his arms. "I don't know where my wife is. I don't know where my wife and the other children are. Look, it's getting too hot. The wood paneling is burning. Over there, the hall of the bank building." We ran into a hall. It was surrounded by flames, but looked solid. There seemed to be no more bombs exploding here, but all around everything was ablaze. I could not make out any details. I saw only the flames everywhere, heard the noise of the fire and the storm, was terribly exhausted inside. After a while, Eisenman said, "We must get down to the Elbe. We'll get through." He ran down the slope with a child on his shoulders. After 5 steps, I was out of breath. I was unable to follow. A group of people were clambering up through the public gardens to the Brule Terrace. The route went close by the fires, but I had to be cooler at the top and it easier to breathe. Then I was standing at the top in the strong wind and the showers of sparks to right and left, fires. Buildings were ablaze. The Belvedere, yes, and probably also the Art Academy. Whenever the showers of sparks became too much for me on one side, I dodged to the other. Within a wider radius, nothing but fires. Standing out like a torch on this side of the Elbe, the tall building at Pirnischer Platz, glowing white, as bright as day on the other side, the roof of the finance ministry. Slowly, thoughts came to me. Eva, was she lost? Had she been able to save herself? Had I thought too little about her? I had wrapped the woolen blanket, one over my head and shoulders. It also covered the star. In my hand, I held the gray bag and, yes, also the small leather case with Ava's woolen things. How I managed to hold on to it with all the scrambling about is a mystery to me. How the storm again and again tore at my blanket, hurt my head. It had begun to rain. The ground was soft and wet. I did not want to put anything down, so there was serious physical strain, but in between there was constantly present Eva. Why had I not, what had happened to her? Why had I not thought enough about her? Sometimes I thought, she's more capable and courageous than I am. She will have got to safety. Sometimes, if only she didn't suffer.
and then simply, if only the night were over. Once a man addressed me, "You're also a Jew, aren't you? I've been living in your house since yesterday." Löwenstam. Another time, a young man holding up his trousers with one hand came up to me in broken German, "Dutch. Imprisoned at police headquarters. Ran for it. The others are burning in the prison." It rained. The storm blew. Groups of people stood or sat. There was fire everywhere. I was quite dull. I had no thoughts at all. No more than occasional scraps rose up in my mind. Eva, why am I not worried about her all the time? Why can I not make out any details but see only the theatrical fires to my right and left, the burning beams and scraps and rafters in and above the stone walls? Then the calm figure of the statue on the terrace made a strange impression on me again. Who was he? But most of the time, I stood as if half asleep and waited for dawn. I had no sense of time. It took forever and didn't take so long at all, and then dawn began to break. The burning went on and on. Finally, probably at about 7, the terrace forbidden to Jews was by now somewhat empty. I walked past the still burning shell of the Belvedere and came to the terrace wall. A number of people were sitting there. After a minute, someone called out to me, "Eva!" Eva was sitting unharmed on the suitcase, wearing her fur coat. We greeted one another very warmly, and we were completely indifferent to the loss of our belongings, and to remain so even now. We were still at the critical moment, someone had literally pulled Eva out of the entrance hall of number 3 and into the Aryan cellar. Once, as she was searching, she had wanted to light a cigarette, had no matches, something was glowing on the ground. She wanted to use it. It was a burning corpse. All in all, Eva had kept her head much better than I, had observed much more calmly, and had gone her own way. So now it was Wednesday, the 14th of February, and our lives were saved, and we were together. We were still standing together after our first greeting when Eisman appeared with Shorshi. He had not been able to find the other members of his family. He was so low he began to cry. "In a moment the child is going to ask for something to eat. What can I give him?" And then he pulled himself together. We would have to try to find our people, and I would have to remove my star, just as he had already taken off his. Eva
thereupon tore my star from my coat and my jacket with a pocket knife. Eisenman then suggested going to the Jewish cemetery. It would be undamaged and be a meeting point. He strode ahead, and we soon lost sight of him. We have not seen him since. In the cellar of the Albertinium, Eva stretched out on a low platform and slept soundly. I walked around, slept again, walked around again. I was completely without thoughts or sense of time. Very late at night or early in the morning, Steinitz rushed up to me. "We're all being taken out of here, to Meissen, to Glotche." I woke Eva. We sat for a long time. Then dawn broke. Then another lorry was ready, a few wounded on stretchers were put on board, and then we, the healthy ones, were pushed in between them and to the back. A bumpy ride past ruins and fires. We arrived at the airport fairly early on Thursday morning. Sunday, March 18. Just after 7 downstairs. Brief morning reflection arisen from great love. In fact, the main point, after all, is that for 40 years we have so much loved one another and do so love one another. In fact, the main point, after all, is that I'm not at all sure that all of this is going to come to an end. For certain, nothingness, the loss of individual consciousness, and that is the true nothingness, is altogether probable, and anything else highly improbable. But have we not continually experienced since 1914, and even more since 1933, and even more in recent weeks, with ever-increasing frequency, the most utterly improbable, the most completely unimaginable things? Has not what was once completely unimaginable to us become commonplace and a matter of course? If I have lived through the persecutions in Dresden, if I have lived through the 13th of February and these weeks as a refugee, why should I just not as well live, or rather die, to find the two of us somewhere, Eva and I, with angel wings, or in some other droll form? It is not only the word impossible that has gone out of circulation. Unimaginable also has no validity anymore. June 10th, we arrived back in Dresden. We found the Glazer's house with nothing but ruins all around. Frau Glaser greeted us with kisses and tears. She had thought us dead. Glaser himself was somewhat decrepit and listless. We were fed. We were able to rest. In the late afternoon, We walked up to our house in Döschen.